On December 4th, 2021, Sony Pictures released brand new footage of the next installment of arguably the most acclaimed film series of the Spider-Man franchise, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse Part 1. The footage was visually stunning and energetic, highlighted new character and costume designs for Miles Morales and Gwen Stacy, and teased an exciting new future to this series of films. Combined with the hype for the then upcoming Spider-Man No Way Home, which was only 12 days away, you would be forgiven for thinking that Sony had finally righted the ship and found a way to sail the Spider-Man franchise into a bold new future. And then, on the exact same day, like a turd in the wind, Sony dropped a full 3.5-minute long action scene from Morbius. And we all realized, oh yeah, no, they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Again, this full scene, this major beat from the movie, presumably the first transformation sequence in the film, came out online the same day as the Across the Spider-Verse trailer, and not alongside it. This wasn't at an investors conference or at Comic-Con. This wasn't anywhere where they would be seen side by side. It wasn't right before a movie. They just both went online the same day. In response, the YouTuber Eric Ravenscraft tweeted this: "Releasing this now is proof either that Sony is still incompetent and only making good movies by accident, or that they're actively trying to bury this movie." Alright, maybe that's a little harsh. But also probably not, because it really seems like Sony is running the Spider-Man brand under the very flawed premise that we all want an extended MCU-style universe where every Spider-Man character they own gets their own film that Spider-Man is not in. So let's take a look at Morbius as a character, as well as the mindset Sony had going into the process of making a movie about him, and hopefully we can learn something about the future of these not Spider-Man but kinda Spider-Man Sony movies. Michael Morbius first showed up in Amazing Spider-Man 101, where Peter Parker had 4 extra arms and was trying to... Yeah, you're right, I can't really get into this without explaining the 4 extra arms. But I'm going to. Okay, so in issue 100, it doesn't matter why, but Peter made a potion to get rid of his spider powers. And then when he woke up, instead he had 4 extra arms. So he reached out to his scientist friend Dr. Kurt Connors, aka the Lizard, to ask for help. Yeah, that guy who spent his entire professional career trying to learn how to regrow arms. Peter goes to him to try to figure out how to get rid of arms. Peter, maybe just ask him for a lab and don't explain why you need it. It may just be a sore subject. Peter goes to Dr. Connors' lab, which is in an abandoned house, naturally, to try to figure out how to get rid of the 4 extra arms situation. While that's happening, we cut away to a gaunt, pale figure on a boat, running from men with guns. Hey, it's like the footage we saw from the Morbius movie. That's almost something. Anyway, this gaunt monster is Morbius, and he kills all the guys. Then he flees the boat and makes his way to shore to sleep during the day in a house he finds. Huh, that abandoned house looks familiar. That's odd. While he sleeps during the day, he feels the guilt of the people he's killed. Michael Morbius was a doctor with a blood disease that was killing him, a beautiful wife who is way too good for him, according to him, and a best friend and colleague who just wants to help. Morbius and his friend test the cure on Morbius, but it turns him into a living vampire. Ooh. He killed his friend, and then he felt guilty and jumped into the sea. But while underwater,
he decides he wants to live.
Anyway, he wakes up in this house, runs into Spider-Man, and they fight, and guess who else shows up? Dr. Kurt Connors, regular person, and also, actually, he turns into the Lizard during the fight as well. The next issue and a half are about the Lizard and Spider-Man teaming up to fight Morbius, while the Lizard has Kurt Connors' mind, but is trying to hold the Lizard's personality back so he can actually work with Spider-Man. So in the first Morbius story, about 3 men fighting to keep their animal instincts at bay and return to their lives as scientists, Michael Morbius is the least interesting character. Good start. Morbius apparently dies at the end of the story, and Spider-Man, of course, gets rid of those arms. The extra ones. He has his normal ones still. But obviously, Morbius came back a few times, although really not that often. He still shows up occasionally as a scientist that people seek advice from, which is weird because he hasn't actually fixed his vampirism. Like, it's a common thing. People will go to various scientists. We'll see basically a montage of them asking for advice from super smart people in the MCU. And Morbius is always there, and it's like, he hasn't even fixed his problem. He is not an expert that we should be consulting. He also rolls with a bunch of monsters who live under the streets of New York, and he helped put the Punisher's dismembered corpse back together into a Frankenstein monster called Frankencastle. that is actually still the best use anyone has made of Morbius as a character. In a lot of ways, Morbius was a product of his time. In February 1971, the Comics Code Authority, which regulated what content could and could not appear in comic books, lifted their ban on vampires. And so Morbius first appears in a comic cover dated October 1971. The writer of the issue, Roy Thomas, said he was inspired by a science fiction film he saw as a kid, where a man becomes a vampire through radiation rather than magic. Which of course makes him a perfect fit for a Spider-Man comic, because Spider-Man also got his powers from radiation. I don't think I needed to explain that, you probably knew that already. And in a weird way, Morbius acted as a sort of signal that Marvel was about to dive deep into the vampire craze. The next year, Tomb of Dracula hit shelves and introduced characters like Marvel's version of Dracula, Hannibal King, and someone else. Oh yeah, that guy. We'll come back to him. Ironically, when the 90s cartoon adapted this story, Morbius was actually a victim of censorship. Due to restrictions from executives, Morbius couldn't be a vampire, and he couldn't bite people. So now he had suckers on his hands that left welts on his victims, who definitely didn't die when he attacked them. They're all gonna be fine. And he didn't drain their blood, he drained their plasma.
I hunger for plasma. Maybe he's getting weak from lack of plasma. I need more plasma.
We heard the word plasma a lot in his episodes. Also, in the cartoon, he doesn't have a disease, but there's a plague in his hometown, which is what drives him to science. He also isn't ugly right away. That's something from the comics where he doesn't change his face at all when he becomes a vampire. That's just what he looks like because of his disease. But the cartoon and the movie sort of have him shift into this snub-nosed bat-like version of himself. It's a choice. And finally, the experiment in his origin for the show is slightly different.
I am now activating the neogenic recombinator. No! No! Get out of there! My hand!
Oh yeah, Michael Morbius is Greek in the comics. I think in the show he's just vaguely Eastern European. I don't have a very good ear for accents, so I'm just going to trust that if you are Greek or Eastern European, you'll let me know if that accent is remotely close to anything. But aside from those pretty significant changes, the rest of the elements of the story were there. Morbius still felt bad about the people he attacked after sucking their plasma, but he couldn't help but feed on others in order to survive. And look, the idea of a heroic vampire who feels regret about sucking blood and has to fight against his urges isn't bad. It's the premise of Angel and Twilight and the Vampire Diaries, so clearly there's some pathos there for writers to explore. But that's also kind of why it's weird that Morbius is getting a movie now, right? My first instinct when seeing the trailer was not very charitable. In fact, I believe my exact words were, "Isn't it kind of late for a Dracula Untold ripoff?" Because this film does seem to be chasing some trends that are not really that big in movies anymore. Vampires had their day in the sun, pun intended, but there hasn't been a big budget vampire movie since the last Underworld sequel in 2016. Now, it's always possible that Morbius will kickstart a new wave of vampire films if this one is successful. After all, Hollywood is always chasing trends and learning the wrong lesson from things. But it seems way more likely to me that this movie is just coming a few years too late. In fact, a lot of this actually seems really reminiscent of The Incredible Hulk, the second MCU movie back in 2008. It's about a scientist seeking treatment for an ongoing disorder, but also he turns into a monster and kills people. We get this shot, which is so similar to these two shots of the Hulk from the Avengers. And also, this whole sequence that they released, this 3.5-minute action scene, is almost exactly the same as the first action scene in The Incredible Hulk. Some faceless mercenaries with guns march around a shady warehouse-looking place, getting picked off one by said scientist-turned-monster, who then wakes up shirtless and tries to figure out what's going on. And here's the thing. I like The Incredible Hulk. I'm one of the few people who seems to actually care about that film at all. But it's not a perfect film, and it really did not resonate well with audiences. And speaking of which, there have been 2 Hulk movies, and neither of them were huge hits. And that character was, inarguably, the most famous superhero Marvel had the rights to until they made their deal to share custody of Spider-Man. Hulk had a TV show in the 70s, a cartoon in the 90s, more merchandise than any Marvel character besides Spidey, including those big Hulk fists, which were absolutely everywhere in the 2000s, and yet the movies didn't do well. And not only that, but Incredible Hulk came out in 2008. And since then, the superhero movie has evolved considerably. Even in 2008, audiences already expected more from superhero movies, especially after Iron Man broke the mold 6 weeks earlier. And now, their expectations are much, much higher. So when I see this clip, and how similar it is to the Incredible Hulk, I have to wonder, hey Sony, have you thought this through? Because people knew who the Hulk was, and they didn't even see the movie. No one knows who Morbius is, and now you're asking them to see a very similar movie, but without the same brand recognition. Well, they make sure to include a quick poster of Spider-Man in the trailer, and a little clip of Michael Keaton as Toomes from Spider-Man Homecoming, so yeah, that's not the same thing, Sony. It just isn't. So why did Sony do this? Why make a movie that is an origin story for who is essentially a Spider-Man villain, or anti-hero at best, but not like Venom, not somebody the audience actually knows about or cares about in advance, and then strip all of the Spider-Man away from that story? Why would they do this? Do you remember the end of Amazing Spider-Man 2? If you don't, here's a quick refresher. The late, great Michael Massey, playing a character called the Gentleman, returns from his brief cameo at the end of the first film and visits Harry Osborn in prison, where they talk about putting together a small team to take over the city. The Gentleman then visits Oscorp, where 3 pieces of tech are kept in glass cases: the Rhino suit, the Vulture wings, and Dr. Octopus's arms. So the filmmakers were clearly setting up the Sinister Six, which is an iconic team of Spider-Man villains. And you know, while I don't really think that putting 3 tech backpacks in a glass case is quite the same thing as doing the actual legwork to set up those villains as their own characters, I understand why they wanted to hint that the Sinister Six was on their way to fight Peter. Except, that's not quite what they were doing. Because the year before, Sony had announced the Venom movie as well as a Sinister Six film written and directed by Drew Goddard. According to the few details we have from the synopsis, the film was said to be a redemption story for the characters and would probably not feature Spider-Man. So Sony didn't care about having the Sinister Six because they might make great enemies for a Spider-Man film. They just wanted to capitalize on the IP. This actually tracks with everything Sony has been doing with the Spider-Man brand for the past 10 years. They've been trying to make their own MCU with the few Marvel properties they control, and they're planning to milk it for all it's worth. Outside of the Spider-Verse and Venom films, they've been trying to develop a TV show about Silk and movies about Silver Sable and Black Cat, both together and separately, Nightwatch, Jackpot, Madam Web, a female-centric movie that might be Spider-Woman, set to be directed by Olivia Wilde, which is the only one that sounds good to me. And of course, they've greenlit a Kraven the Hunter movie, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson as Kraven, who previously played Quicksilver, in a movie that came out 1 year before Tom Holland showed up in the MCU as Spider-Man and fought Quicksilver's sister. Because sure, that's not going to be confusing at all. General audiences will totally understand what's going on. The common thread, not a web pun I intended to make, but I'll stick with it, another pun I didn't mean to make, the common thread for these films seems to be the goal to take these characters who were originally created to play off of Spider-Man or enhance his world in some way, and then divorce them from him so they can become their own franchise. I personally am not a fan of the Venom character in most of his incarnations, but it's especially baffling to me that they chose to give him his own franchise with an origin story film, when his previous origin was designed to make him as meaningful a villain as possible to Spider-Man. Without that, with his own origin and his own franchise, there's nothing to give their future conflicts any pathos, especially on Peter's side of things. And yes, I saw No Way Home. I actually don't think that fixes the problem. I think it makes it even weirder, to be completely honest. That's why the only film on this list that I would be interested in seeing would be Spider-Woman. Not just because of the talent behind the camera, but also because Spider-Woman isn't a Spider-Man character. She's got nothing to do with him. And actually, even if she's doing like a Spider-Gwen film, that character specifically works better when you don't have to try to fit her into Peter's franchise. So either of those would be totally fine. But the rest of these, I am hardly sold on these ideas. Most of these characters are either designed to have no character arc, or their character arcs are based on their interactions with either Spider-Man or Peter Parker. And while you might be able to separate them from him, like they did with Venom, they certainly want to bring Spider-Man back into their lives at some point, and when they do, well, maybe Sony has cannibalized a pretty big source of drama for Peter to experience when he meets these future villains. So why should we want a Sinister Six film without Spider-Man? Where is the appeal of Kraven the Hunter having a film when his whole deal can be pretty well described by saying, he hunts big animals and he treats Spider-Man like a big animal? We don't need a whole film to understand that guy's deal. Now, does that mean they can't make movies about these characters and have them be good? No, it doesn't mean that at all. Even if they're not good, they still could be enjoyable. People love those Venom movies. So, maybe I'm wrong about all of this. But let's look back at Morbius. Because of course, this is part of their push for the Sinister Six. Michael Keaton's Vulture shows up at the end of the very first trailer, because they needed us to know right away that this is totally connected to the MCU. Now that we know that, we know we must care about this movie. But also, should we? Like I said earlier, everything I'm seeing so far from this film looks like a worse version of The Incredible Hulk, which is already nobody's favorite Marvel movie. And unlike the comics, it's not as interesting for a movie to say, well, this time we have a scientific explanation for vampires. Because we've already seen that in Daybreakers, and Underworld, and I Am Legend, and... what was that other one?
You obviously do not know who you are fucking with!
Oh yeah, let's talk about Blade. That title card is working on several levels, and we're going to get to all of them. First of all, Morbius and Blade have fought several times. Of course they have. Morbius is a tragic vampire man who feels bad about murder, and Blade is a ruthless vampire hunter. But also it's gotten to the point where, arguably, Morbius' real enemy isn't Spider-Man, it's Blade. Fun fact, Blade in the comics used to be human, just a regular guy. He was immune to vampire bites for some reason, but he wasn't part vampire. But in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, Blade was the son of a vampire and a human. And then the films also made him half vampire, but this time it was because a vampire bit his mother while she was pregnant. So of course the comics followed suit and turned Blade into a Dhampir, a half vampire, half human. And they did that by having him get bit by Morbius. Although later on it was retconned even further, so his mother did get bit while she was pregnant and he was always a Dhampir after all, but you know, we just never talked about it until after Morbius bit him. Comics are cool and never confusing. But even without that connection, they still make very natural enemies. Even though when they fight, there's usually someone like Spider-Man trying to insist that Blade can cool it, because Morbius isn't a real vampire. Blade is still a scary dude who takes his job seriously. So since we know Blade is coming to the MCU, played by Mahershala Ali, it's reasonable for us to wonder whether Blade and Morbius will fight in an upcoming movie. But here's where I have to wonder. What interest does Marvel Studios have in making that happen? We know why Sony might want that. It makes Morbius more essential viewing, and it justifies the entire approach to the Marvel IP that they control by giving them a different point of connection to the MCU besides just Spider-Man. But why should Marvel Studios greenlight that movie? They know Blade will do well on its own because the audience has been thirsty for more Blade content for more than a decade. Well, that's just another unintended pun, I'm sorry. Thirsty, bloodthirsty, vampires. I don't know if I need to explain that. And if Morbius flops, why tie that movie into the MCU any more than they have to? Maybe Morbius will become a smash hit like Venom was, although the film seems to take itself way too seriously to connect with the audience that enjoys Venom. But if it flops, as I suspect it will, then Marvel won't have any real reason to make a deal to bridge him over with Blade. And if that's the case, then the audience will basically be asked to choose. Will we follow a Morbius solo sequel, or would we rather just go see Blade? And ultimately, I just don't see Morbius winning that fight. I also don't think Jared Leto is that good an actor. I've never seen a good Jared Leto performance that I don't think could have been replaced by a very handsome mop. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It wound up being a little bit more negative than I expected, but this topic has been on my mind for a while and I wanted to get it out there and see if anybody else feels the same way. It was also such a trip going back and watching the old cartoon for this video. I swear, the phrase neogenic recombinator takes me right back to childhood. If you like this video, please hit the like button and share it with a friend because this is a new channel and I would love your support reaching new people. And let me know in the comments what you thought of this video. Did you enjoy this vibe? Is there anything else I could improve on? And are there any topics in particular you'd like me to cover?
I need more plasma. Another victim of severe plasma drain.
I must keep trying to rid myself of this horrible need for plasma.